House by Jules Verne. Translated by Agnes D. Kingston. Book 2, Chapter 3. The Crawl. The death of this unfortunate man made a deep impression upon us, both from the fact itself and from the cause, though it was anything but an unusual occurrence. It was but one more added to the thousands who annually fall victims in India to the formidable reptiles. Footnote: in 1877, 1,677 human beings perished from snake bites. The rewards paid by government for the destruction of these reptiles show that in the same year, 127,295 were killed. It has been said, jestingly I presume, that formerly there were no snakes in Martinique, but that the English imported them when they were obliged to give up the island to France. The French had no occasion to retaliate in this manner when they yielded their conquests in India, for nature had shown herself only too prodigal in that respect. Under the influence of the venom, the body of the Hindu began to exhibit signs of rapid decomposition. A speedy burial was necessary. His companions, therefore, set to work, and soon laid him in a grave deep enough to protect the body from wild beasts. When this sad ceremony was ended, Matthias Van Gweet invited us to accompany him to his kraal, and we readily did so. Half an hour's walk brought us to the place, which deserved its name of kraal, though it is a word more especially used by the settlers of South Africa. It was a wide enclosure, standing in a glade in the depths of the forest. Matthias Van Gweet had arranged it with a perfect understanding of the requirements of his trade. A row of high palisades, having a gate wide enough to admit carts, surrounded it on the four sides. Inside was a long hut, made of trunks of trees and planks, which was the dwelling place. 6 cages, divided into several compartments, and each mounted on 4 wheels, were drawn up in the left end of the enclosure. From the roars which issued from them we concluded they were not untenanted. To the left were penned a dozen buffaloes, which were fed on the mountain grass. These were the animals used to draw the traveling menagerie. 6 men, who attended to these creatures and drove the carts, and 10 others who were especially skilful in the chase, completed the staff of attendants in the kraal. The carters were hired only for the duration of the campaign. Their services ended by driving the carts to the nearest railway station. There the cages were placed on trucks and wheeled off, vid. Allahabad to Bombay or Calcutta. The hunters, who were Hindus, are called shikaris. They were employed to discover and follow up the traces of animals, dislodge them, and then assist in their capture. Matthias Van Gweet and his men had lived for some months in this kraal. They were there exposed not only to the attacks of ferocious beasts, but also to the fevers with which the Terai is infested. The damp nights, the pernicious evaporations from the ground, the moist heat hanging about under the thick-growing trees, through which the sun never penetrates, all combine to make this lower zone of the Himalayas a most unhealthy region. The purveyor and his men were, however, so well acclimatized that the malaria affected them no more than it did the tigers or other inhabitants of the Terai. It would not have been wise for us to live in the kraal, nor did this enter into Captain Hood's plan. Except for a night or 2 passed on the watch, we intended living in Steam House, which was too high up for any baleful vapors to reach us there. Here we were, then, arrived at Van Gweet's encampment. The door opened for us to enter. Matthias Van Gweet appeared particularly flattered by our visit. "Now, gentlemen," he said, "permit me to do the honors of my kraal. This establishment is replete with every necessary for the pursuit of my vocation. In reality, it is but a hut on a large scale, which, in this country, hunters call a hoodie." Saying this, our host opened the door of the dwelling which he and his people occupied together. Nothing could have been more simple. one room for the master, another for the carters, and another for the shikaris. A fourth, rather larger, serving for both kitchen and dining room. After visiting the habitation of these bimina belonging to the highest order of mammalia, we were requested to look at the nearest of the quadrupeds' dwellings. This was the most interesting part of the crawl. The cages were not like the comfortable dens of a zoological garden, but recalled rather the appearance of a traveling show. All that was required to complete them was a gaudily painted canvas hung above a stage, and representing in startling colors a tamer in pink tights and velvet jacket, striking an attitude in the midst of a bounding herd of wild beasts, who, with bloody jaws and claws outspread, were cowering under the lash of some heroic Van Amberg. But such a picture would have been wasted on the desert air, as the public were not there to see and be edified by it. A few paces further on were the buffaloes. They occupied a portion of the kraal on the right, and their daily rations of fresh grass were brought to them there. It would have been impossible to allow these animals to stray in the neighboring pastures. As Matthias Van Guit elegantly remarked, "The freedom of pasture allowable in the United Kingdom is incompatible with the dangers presented by the Himalayan forests." The menagerie, properly so called, comprised 6 cages on wheels. Each cage, with a barred front, was divided into 3 compartments. Doors, or rather partitions, moved from the top, made it easy for the animals in one compartment to be driven into another when necessary. The cages at the present time contained 7 tigers, 2 lions, 3 panthers, and a couple of leopards. Van Guit informed us that his stock would not be complete until he had captured 2 leopards, 3 tigers, and 1 lion more. Then he intended leaving this camp, proceeding to the nearest railway station, and thence travelling to Bombay. The wild beasts were easily watched in their cages, and proved to be magnificent creatures, but particularly ferocious. They had been too recently caught to have yet become accustomed to a state of captivity. This was plain from their constant roars, their restless pacings up and down, and the blows they gave the bars, straining them in many places. On seeing us, their rage was redoubled, but Van Guit was not in the least disturbed. "Poor beasts," remarked Captain Hood. "Poor beasts," echoed Fox. "Do you believe, then, that they are more to be pitied than those which you kill?" asked our host, somewhat sharply. "Less to be pitied than blamed, for allowing themselves to be caught," returned Hood. If it was true that the wild beasts of a country such as Africa are sometimes compelled to undergo a long fast, because the animals upon which they feed are scarce, such could never be the case in the Terai zone. Here abound bisons, buffaloes, zebras, boars, antelopes, to which the lions, tigers, and panthers are constantly giving chase. Besides goats and flocks of sheep, not to mention the poor ryots who are their shepherds, offer a certain and easy prey. They always find abundance in the Himalayan forest to satisfy their hunger. The purveyor fed his menagerie chiefly on the flesh of bison and zebras, and it was the shikari's duty to procure this meat. It is a mistake to imagine that this species of hunting is without danger. Quite the contrary. The tiger himself has much to fear from the savage buffalo, who is a terrible animal when wounded. Many a hunter has, to his horror, found his antagonist rooting up, with his horns, the tree in which he has taken refuge. It is said that the eye of a ruminant is a regular magnifying lens, increasing the size of an object 3-fold, and that man, in this gigantic aspect, awes him. It is also asserted that the upright position of a human being walking is of a nature to terrify ferocious animals, and therefore that it is far better to face them standing than lying or crouching down. I cannot tell how much truth there may be in these statements, but it is very certain that a man, even when drawn up to his full height, produces no effect whatever on the savage buffalo, and if his shot misses, he is almost certainly lost. The buffalo of India has a short, square head, smooth horns flattened at the base, a humped back, like its American congener, its legs, from the foot to the knee, being white, and its size, from the foot of the tail to the end of its muzzle, measuring sometimes 12 feet. Although it is not particularly ferocious when feeding in herds on the plain, it yet is very formidable to any hunter who rashly attacks it. Such were the ruminants destined to feed the beasts in Van Gweet's menagerie. That they might obtain them with greater certainty and less danger, the shikaris preferred to trap them. The purveyor, who knew his business, was very sparing as to his captives' food. Once a day, at 12 o'clock, 4 or 5 pounds of meat were given them, and nothing more. He even, though not from any religious motive, allowed them to fast from Saturday to Monday. They must have passed a dismal Sunday. Then, when 48 hours had elapsed, and their modest pittance appeared, the excitement and the roaring may be imagined, the cages actually swaying backwards and forwards with the movement of the springing, bounding creatures inside. Yes, poor beasts, we may be tempted to say with Captain Hood. But Matthias Van Gweet did not act thus without a motive, and this enforced abstinence was good for the animals, and heightened their price in the European market. It may easily be imagined that, while Van Gweet was exhibiting his collection, more as a naturalist than a showman, his tongue was not allowed to stand still. On the contrary, he talked, he described, he related. And as wild beasts were the principal subjects of his redundant periods, it was all tolerably interesting to us. "But, Mr. Van Gweet," said Banks, "can you tell me if the profits of the trade are in proportion to the risks that are run?" "Sir," answered the purveyor, "it was formerly extremely remunerative. However, for the last few years I have been forced to perceive that ferocious animals have declined. You may judge of this by the current prices of the last quotation. Our principal market is the Zoological Garden in Antwerp. Volatiles, ophidians, specimens of the simian and saurian family, representatives of the carnivora of both hemispheres, such as the consuetudinal—" At this word Captain Hood bowed. "Produce of our adventurous battues in the forests of the peninsula. From one cause or another, the public taste seems to have altered, and the sale price is sometimes less than what was expended on the capture. For instance, a male ostrich is now sold but for 44 lakhs, and the female for 32 lakh. A black panther found a purchaser for only 60 lakh, a Java tigress for 96 lakh. And a family of lions, father, mother, uncle, and 2 healthy cubs, were sold in a lump for 280 lakh. "They really went for nothing," said Banks. "As to proboscidate animals," resumed Van Gweet. "Proboscidate?" said Captain Hood. "We call by that scientific name those pachydermata which nature has furnished with a trunk." "Such as elephants?" "Yes, elephants since the Quaternary period. They were mastodons in the prehistoric times." "Thank you," replied Hood. "As to proboscidate animals," resumed Van Gweet, "we must soon renounce even their capture, unless it is for the sake of their tusks, for the consumption of ivory has in no way diminished. But since the authors of dramatic pieces, at their wits' end for some novelty, have conceived the idea of introducing these creatures on the stage, they are taken about from one town to another, so that the same elephant, parading the country with a strolling company, satisfies the curiosity of a whole province. From this cause, elephants are in less request than formerly." "But," asked, "do you only supply European menageries with these specimens of the Indian fauna?" "You will pardon me," replied Matthias Van Gweet, "if on this subject, sir, I allow myself, without being too curious, to put to you a simple question?" I bowed in token of acquiescence. "You are French, sir," said the purveyor. "That is plainly seen, not only by your accent, but by your type, which is an agreeable combination of the Gallo-Roman and the Celt. Now, as a Frenchman, you cannot have any propensity for distant journeys, and probably have not made the tour of the world?" Here Van Gweet's hand described one of the great circles of the sphere. "I have not yet had that pleasure," I replied. "I will ask you then, sir," continued our friend, "not if you have been to the Indies, as you are already here, but if you are thoroughly acquainted with the Indian peninsula." "Imperfectly as yet," I answered. "However, I have already visited Bombay, Calcutta, Benares, Allahabad, and the valley of the Ganges. I have seen their monuments. I have admired—" "Ah, what is that, sir? What is all that?" interrupted Matthias Van Gweet, turning away his head and shaking his hand, in a manner to express supreme disdain. Then, launching out into an animated description, "Yes, what is all that, if you have not visited the menageries of those powerful Rajahs, who maintain the worship of the superb animals on which the sacred territory of India prides itself? Resume your tourist staff, sir. Go into Guicoar and render homage to the King of Baroda. Inspect his menageries, which owe the greater number of their tenants, lions from Katawar, bears, panthers, cheetahs, lynx, and tigers, to me. Be present at the celebration of the marriage of his 60,000 pigeons, which takes place every year with great pomp. Admire his 500 bulbuls, the nightingales of the peninsula, whose education is attended to as carefully as if they were heirs to the throne. Contemplate the elephants. One of them is the executioner, and his business it is to dash the head of the condemned man on the stone of punishment. Then transfer yourself to the establishments of the Rajah of Mysore, the richest of Asiatic sovereigns. Enter his palace, where you may count hundreds of rhinoceri, elephants, tigers, and every creature of high rank which belongs to the animal aristocracy of India. And when you have seen all this, sir, perhaps you need no longer be accused of ignorance of the marvels of this incomparable country." I could do no more than bow before these remarks. Van Gweet's impassioned style of representing things admitted of no discussion. Captain Hood, however, pressed him more directly about the particular fauna of this region of the Terai. "A little information, if you please," he said, "about the wild beasts which have come to this part of India to hunt. Although I am only a sportsman, and, I repeat, I do not compete with you, Mr. Van Gweet, yet if I could be of any use in capturing the tigers which you still want for your collection, I shall only be too pleased to do so. But when your menagerie is completed, you must not take it ill if I, in my turn, shoot a few for my own personal amusement." Matthias Van Gweet put himself into the attitude of a man who has resigned himself to submit to what he disapproves of, but does not know how to prevent. He admitted, however, that the Terai contains a considerable number of troublesome animals, in no great request in the European markets, so that their sacrifice might be permitted. "Kill the boars, I consent to that," said he, "although these swine of the order of Pachydermata are not carnivorous." "Carnivorous?" said Captain Hood. "I mean by that they are herbivorous. Their ferocity is so great that hunters who are rash enough to attack them run the greatest danger." "And wolves?" "Wolves are numerous all over the peninsula, and are much to be dreaded when they advance in herds on some solitary farm. These animals slightly resemble the wolf of Poland, and I certainly have not much esteem for either jackals or wild dogs. I do not deny the ravages they commit, and as they have not the smallest marketable value, and are unworthy to figure amongst the higher classes of zoocracy, I will abandon them also to you, Captain Hood." "And bears?" I next asked. "Bears are good, sir," answered the zoologist with a nod of approval. "Although Those of India are not sought for quite as eagerly as other of the family Ursidae. They nevertheless possess a certain commercial value which recommends them to the benevolent attention of connoisseurs. Your taste might hesitate between the two species which we find in the valleys of Kashmir and the hills of Rajmahal. But, except perhaps in the hibernating period, these creatures are almost inoffensive, and in short would not tempt the synergetic instincts of a true sportsman, such as I hold Captain Hood to be." The captain smiled in a significant manner, showing well that, with or without the permission of Matthias van Gweet, he meant only to refer to himself on these special questions. "These animals," continued Van Gweet, "feed only on vegetables, and have nothing in common with the ferocious species, on which the peninsula so justly plumes itself." "Do you include the leopard in your list of wild beasts?" asked Captain Hood. "Most certainly, sir. This creature is active, bold, full of courage, and he can climb trees, so for that reason he is sometimes more formidable than the tiger." "Oh!" ejaculated the captain. "Sir," answered Matthias van Gweet in a dignified tone, "when a hunter is no longer sure of finding a refuge in trees, he is very near being hunted in his turn." "And the panther?" Captain Hood, willing to cut short this discussion. "The panther is superb," answered Matthias van Gweet, "and you may observe, gentlemen, that I have some magnificent specimens. Astonishing animals, which, by a singular contradiction, an antilogy, to use an uncommon word, may be trained for the chase. Yes, gentlemen, in Guigoar especially, the Rajas use panthers in this noble exercise. They are taken out in a palanquin, with their heads muffled like a falcon or a merlin. Indeed, they are regular four-footed hawks. No sooner do the hunters come in sight of a herd of antelopes than the panther is unhooded and flies upon the timid ruminants, whose feet, swift as they are, cannot carry them beyond the reach of those terrible claws. Yes, Captain, yes, you will find panthers in the Terai. You may perhaps find more than you care for, but I warn you charitably that they are by no means tame." "I should hope not," was Captain Hood's reply. "Nor the lions either," added the zoologist, somewhat vexed at this answer. "Ah, lions," said Hood. "Let us speak a little about lions, please." "Well, sir," resumed Matthias van Gweet, "I regard the so-called king of beasts as inferior to his congeners of ancient Libya. Here the males do not wear that mane which is the appendage of the African lion, and in my opinion they are, therefore, but shorn Samsons. They have, besides, almost entirely disappeared from central India to seek a refuge in the Katawar Peninsula, the desert of Thil, and the Terai forest. These degenerate felines, living solitary, like hermits, do not gain strength by frequenting the company of their fellows. Therefore I do not give them the first place in the scale of quadrupeds. Indeed, gentlemen, you may escape from a lion, from a tiger, never." "Ah, tigers!" cried Captain Hood. "Yes, tigers." Fox. "The tiger," replied Van Gweet, growing animated. "To him belongs the crown. We speak of the royal tiger, not the royal lion, and that is but justice. India belongs entirely to him, and may be summed up in him. Was he not the first occupant of the soil? Was it not his right to look upon as invaders not only the representatives of the Anglo-Saxon race, but also the polar race? Is he not indeed the true child of this sacred land of Arivarta? These magnificent animals are spread over the whole surface of the peninsula, and they have not abandoned a single district of their ancestors, from Cape Comorin to the Himalayan barrier." And Matthias van Gweet's arm, stretched out to denote the southern promontory, was now waved northwards towards the mountain peaks. "In the Sundarbans," he continued, "they are at home. There they reign as masters, and woe to all who attempt to dispute with them their territory. In the Nilgiri hills they roam about in a body like wild cats. Si parva licet componere magnis. You can understand from this why these superb felidae are in such demand in all European markets, and are the pride of menageries. What is the great attraction in the public or private wild beast show? The tiger. When do you most fear for the life of the tamer? When he is in the tiger's cage. From what animals do the Rajas pay their weight in gold to obtain them to ornament their royal gardens? The tiger. What creature is always at a premium in the wild animal market exchange of London, Antwerp, and Hamburg? The tiger. In what chase do British officers in India so distinguish themselves? In the tiger hunt. Do you know, gentlemen, what entertainment the independent sovereigns of India provide for their guests? A royal tiger in a cage is brought. The cage is placed in the midst of a wide plain. The Rajah, his guests, his officers, his guards are armed with lances, revolvers, and rifles, and are, for the most part, mounted on gallant solipeds. "Solipeds?" said Captain Hood. "They're horses, if you prefer the more vulgar word." Already the solipeds, terrified by the near neighbourhood of the tiger, his scent, and the light which gleams from his eyes, rear so that it requires all their riders' skill to manage them. Suddenly the door of the cage is thrown open. The monster springs forth, and with wild leaps he flies on the scattered groups. In his fury he immolates a hecatomb of victims. Although sometimes he contrives to break through the circle of fire and sword with which he is surrounded, more often he is overcome and falls, 1 against 100. But at least his death is a glorious one. It is avenged beforehand. "Bravo, Mr. Van Guit!" cried Captain Hood in his turn, becoming quite excited. "Yes, that must be a fine sight. Truly, the tiger is the king of beasts. A royalty, too, which defies revolutions," added the zoologist. "You have caught many, Mr. Van Guit," said Hood. "I have killed many, and I hope not to leave the Terai until the 50th has fallen by my shot." "Captain," said the purveyor with a frown, "I have delivered up to you boars, wolves, bears, and buffaloes. Will not those suffice to gratify your sporting mania?" I saw that our friend Hood would burst forth with as much animation as Matthias Van Guit on this exciting question. Had the one captured more tigers than the other had killed? Was it better to catch or shoot them? This was the matter and theme of discussion. Thereupon the captain and the zoologist commenced to exchange rapid sentences, both speaking at once, and apparently not in the least comprehending what the other said. Banks interposed. "That tigers are the kings of creation is understood, gentlemen, but I must be permitted to add that they are very dangerous to their subjects. In 1862, if I am not mistaken, these excellent felidae devoured all the telegraph clerks in the island of Sangor. We are also told of a tigress who, in 3 years, made no less than 118 victims, and another who in the same space of time destroyed 127 persons. That is rather too much, even for a queen. Lastly, since the mutiny, in an interval of 3 years, 12,554 individuals have perished by tigers' teeth or claws." "But, sir," replied Van Guit, "you seem to forget that these animals are omophagi." "Omophagi?" said Captain Hood. "Yes, eaters of raw flesh, and the natives say that when they have once tasted human flesh, they never care for any other." "Well, sir?" said Banks. "Well, sir," answered Matthias Van Guit, smiling, "they obey their nature. They certainly must eat." End of Book 2, Chapter 3.